In 1983, a small Japanese company released a game that would change the world, Mario Brothers, the tale of two Italian immigrants' struggle in the sewers of New York City. While this moving story melted the hearts of many around the world, it was actually the sequel, Super Mario Brothers, that went on to become the cult classic it is today. In fact, people love this game so much that they've broken it down and built it up again in new ways, more interesting ways that you could hardly even imagine. These are called ROM hacks, and they're not just something that Cosmic plays on Wednesday. While not exactly as cool as hackers in the movies with their green on black flashing screens, ROM hackers take the read-only memory of a game, in this case being Super Mario, and hack or change it. Many ROM hacks consist simply of a single file that changes the existing memory of the game and or adds new memory in order to change functionality and design. I, however, went for what I found to be the easiest option for me, editing the game code in high-level assembly. This way, if I needed to add or edit existing program code, I would be able to do so and then could recompile it into a complete standalone NES program. Luckily, this game has been hacked by every man and their dog at this point, so it wasn't too hard to find the fully disassembled and thoroughly explained assembly code. Even more convenient, I was able to find a version ready to work with my assembler of choice, CC65. The version I found was on romhacking.net, posted by Movax12. With these several thousand lines of well-commented code, I was ready to begin my ROM hacking adventure. And just to make sure what I was doing was going to work, I started with a small test where I changed the mushroom sprite and then recompiled the game. A lot of Super Mario ROM hacks look just like another Mario game. While they can be much more difficult and even look significantly different from the official Nintendo releases, their core style remains the same. While I don't want to stray too far off from classic Mario gameplay and mechanics, I do want something that is stylistically unique. I could think of no better inspiration than that of my favorite book, Journey to the West. The classic tale of Xuanzang, the Tang monk, on his journey to the throne of the Buddha, while at the same time befriending magical companions, being kidnapped by ravenous demons, and overcoming all 99 trials to bring back the Buddhist scriptures to China. On his journey, he is accompanied by Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, Zhu Bajie, former Marshal of the Milky Way, and Sha Wujing, former Heavenly General. The vision for my Mario hack is to have the game follow the same journey as this group, from China to the West, fighting demons, occasionally rescuing the kidnapped Xuanzang, and ultimately finding themselves at the throne of the Buddha. Let me lay out how I'll bring this to fruition. An NES game cartridge contains two things, Program ROM and Character ROM. Program ROM is the game code, while Character ROM contains all sprite data for the game given in 8x8 pixel blocks. To build up Journey to the West from inside Super Mario Bros., I'll have to edit both Program ROM and Character ROM. Although because I'm recompiling the program and character data again, I'm not exactly hacking the ROM directly, but I'll still call this a ROM hack for now. To get the feel of the theme, I started by making some basic artwork for the four main characters I mentioned earlier from the book. What exactly does this all entail? Because the individual sprites the NES uses are only 8x8 pixels each, in order to form large objects like Mario, multiple sprites are placed next to each other and move together. Because of this, even though Mario only has 13 possible frames of movement in his original game, that means that almost a quarter of the entire character ROM is just Mario. Luckily, many of these 13 individual frames share the same characters, especially the head portions, but I still need to create around 80 of these 8x8 sprites per character in the book. In total then, around 320 new sprites. But Super Mario Bros. Only has 256 foreground sprites and 256 background sprites in its 8K of character ROM. So how could I possibly fit more than that into the game? One possible solution is to use dynamic character RAM instead of character ROM, meaning I place these sprites from the character ROM into editable memory, letting me change whatever portion of those sprites I want, even just a single sprite on its own. However, because I need to swap out so many sprites at once, I decided to go with solution number 2, bank switching using a memory mapper. It will be possible to have more than 256 sprites in a game by simply having a character ROM chip that holds more data, then having a chip in between called a mapper point to whichever section of the character ROM to read from. In this way, if I want to switch from using Xuanzang to Wukong, all I have to do is tell the mapper to switch the bank of character ROM it has the NES look at. So I doubled the amount of character ROM in the game, from 8K to 16K. This gives me plenty of room to fit in the other remaining 3 characters to be rotated in. In terms of the mapper I used, I went with the MMC3 mapper. Not because it was the simplest or easiest mapper to use, but because it actually took me a long time to figure out how to get any kind of mapper to work, and this is the only one where I found explicit instructions on how to use it written out plainly. With the mapper working and using the bank switching code I implemented, I'm able to switch out the character ROM bank and smoothly swap one character for another each time the player loses a life. While I was working on the designs for the 4 main characters and learning how to swap between them, I also started to design the levels of the game. After all, it wouldn't be much of a ROM hack if it merely looked cosmetically different. Levels in Super Mario are somewhat complex to understand. Again, I'm grateful for all the documentation that is found online nowadays. It's hard to believe how anyone ever made a ROM hack without all of this. Levels themselves are broken into 2 sections of data, object data and enemy data. Object data starts with a header. This defines the time for the level, where Mario starts, what kind of tile set to load, what the background scenery is, what kind of platforms to use, and where the floor and ceiling are. After the header, the objects are loaded in page by page, where one page constitutes an on-screen 16 by 16 tile area. Each object on this page is defined by 2 bytes, the first defining X and Y, and the second the object type. The object type isn't merely what kind of block it is, it could define whether it is multiple blocks, coins, a bridge, a staircase, or even a pulley, all determined by where it is on the page and what its value is. Enemy data is given in much the same way, with sometimes an extra byte to signal a page jump when no enemies appear on a certain page, or defining where the player should warp to next. This should be familiar to those who know about speedrunning the game. Regular enemies themselves are also defined by 2 bytes each, for location and type, but again, depending on location and value, it may not just define one enemy but a series of enemies, a fire bar, or even a falling platform. Even though all data for the levels is defined beforehand, only a few pages are ever loaded in at once, so that the memory of the system isn't overwhelmed by the whole level. However, if there are too many objects or enemies per page in the data, some may not load properly. Usually this isn't a huge problem, but if a platform doesn't load, that could potentially break a level. So during level design, I needed to be aware of how many enemies could be loaded in at a single time. Certainly I couldn't design the kinds of levels you see in Mario Maker. And I knew it would be a challenge and take time to design levels that were both difficult and fun to play. So I didn't aim for recreating all 8 worlds. Instead, I decided that 4 worlds with 4 levels each would be enough. To help with designing these 16 levels, I used a tool from 2008 called Insect-Tool's SMB utility, which is used primarily for hacking Super Mario Bros. 2. Not that version, the Japan version. Because of this, some of the names of the items on this list are a little off, since SMB2J has some extra items in that game. But visually in this window, I always know what's going on. Normally, this program is used as is to change the data of the levels and then overwrite the data in the final ROM file. But because I knew I would need to edit the code of the game itself and expand the character ROM, I had to use another fresh, only slightly modified copy of Super Mario Bros. To edit the level data and then copy over the byte values into the game code for my version, which was unfortunately a time-consuming process, since these byte values are not written text boxes which I could easily copy and paste into my code. With this sorted out, I came face to face with my greatest challenge yet: creative design. I'm sure designing 2D Mario levels is nothing new to a lot of people, but I've never played any of the Mario Maker games, so when it comes to level design, I was at a loss. I started by writing down as many ideas as I had, and then tested them out. I threw together some fun items and jumps for the first level, and I think that as my first ever Mario level, it wasn't half bad. For the rest of the game, I tried to design levels loosely based off of stories from Journey to the West. while also playing with Mario mechanics to varying degrees of success. If you're looking for the pinnacle of level design, this isn't the ROM hack for you. But if you want a challenge and a few laughs, then I think you might like this. In total, it took nearly 40 hours to design and test all 16 levels. I did my best to make sure there weren't any soft locks and everything runs smoothly, but I apologize if I missed any. With the levels designed, I was able to move on to finishing the character designs for Sun Wukong, Zhu Bajie, and Sha Wujing, along with giving them each a custom power-up. After that, I worked to redesign and recolor the classic Mario enemies to represent monsters and characters from Journey to the West and Chinese mythology, including Gumas into Lushu, Spinies into tigers, Bloopers into dragons, Buzzy Beetles into Hundun, Pipes into dragon pipes, Lakitu into a thunder demon, Koopas into turtles, Piranha plants into spiders, Hammer Bros into Taoist priests, Fireflowers into Manfruit, Bowser into the Ox King, Corns into Yuanbao, and a few more that I won't mention here, but will leave for you to discover when you play. With the artwork and color palettes adjusted, it was time to make some finishing touches. I again am grateful for the high-level assembly code that was provided, but that doesn't mean it was necessarily easy to understand what interacts with what in the game. It took about half an hour just to figure out what makes the top half of the fire flower change colors, just so I could stop that. And other times I had to read through dozens of references to a certain byte value just to get the right color palette location. I also made some quality of life adjustments as well. I removed the finite lives aspect of the game, both to make it easier on the player and let them be able to rotate through the cast of characters without worrying about the number of lives they have left. But don't think that collecting coins is a pointless endeavor now. If the player collects 100 coins, they become invincible, just as if they got a star power-up. So grab as many coins as you can. When it came time to design the title screen, I was confused at first. I thought it would be somewhere in the code of the game, but I couldn't find it anywhere. When I looked up where the title screen data was located in the game, I learned that it was stored at the end of the character ROM, which I thought was strange since I had doubled the amount of character ROM and nothing about the title screen had changed. Then I noticed these messy sprites at the bottom section here. I had erroneously assumed that these were the fireworks sprites, but when I started messing with them to try to squeeze out a few more sprites, the title became messed up like this. These bytes in the character ROM here are actually the design for the title screen. Just in the character ROM editing program I was using, the bytes got interpreted and shown like this. So the design really was hidden at the end of the background characters, which was once the very end of the character ROM before I had added more to it. Since I didn't want to dive deep into learning how the design is actually stored and build it up byte by byte, I used another tool I found on romhacking.net called SMB Title Editor. It looks weird like this because it was compressed from Unicode to ASCII, so none of the original Japanese text shows up as it should, but it still runs the same. I'll link a video explaining the ins and outs of it, or just check out the translated README file. I replaced the Super Mario Bros. Lettering with some blocks to write out Journey to the West in Chinese, and then inserted this logo of the weapons of Xuanzang's 3 disciples, Wukong's cudgel, Bajie's rake, and Wujing's spade. You'll also see these show up as their custom power-up when you play as that character. Before publishing, I wanted to make sure that the hack was completely beatable. While testing, I had made use of save states to make sure each section of every level was beatable, but I told myself I wouldn't publish the game until I beat the whole thing start to finish without the use of save states mid-level. This was actually a hard task for me as I'm not that good at classic Mario. And all I can say is that I'm very glad there are infinite lives here, because some sections of the game took me a while. Looking at you, 1-4 entry. As with most of my other projects, I couldn't cover every detail, and there was a lot more I'd like to mention, but I'll save that for another day. If you're interested in writing your own ROM hack, I'll link the resources I used in the description. And I also see all your comments, so if you leave a question, I'll do my best to answer it. Journey to the West, a Super Mario Bros. ROM hack, is free to download via the top link in the description. One goal I have for the release of this game is to have it get picked up by some bootleg NES clone, and have it come as one of those 500 pre-installed games. I think it would be cool to have my game up there with the likes of Baseball New and Tiles of Fate. If you want to see more cool projects like this, consider subscribing. And until next time, thanks for watching.